the things that caught my attention lately is what I saw as a gold rush around an AI-powered companion for developers. And this gold rush was happening on the GitHub, and the companion, the digital assistant for developers, is called Copilot.
Yes.
And my mind started sort of imagining what could this mean for low-code, no-code development, which is a very big thing in financial services these days, if developers are augmented with these companions, and specifically Copilot. And then I started reading about Microsoft's vision to make Copilot, this, if you want, AI digital assistant, into its existing apps and ecosystems like Microsoft Office and so on, which of course is very much entrenched into financial services. And this is the reason that I reached out to Derek Snyder. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Derek is a senior director at Microsoft, focused on Microsoft Teams. Derek, I understand you're really an entrepreneur with what I would call a very colorful career. You can tell us a little bit about that journey, but I understand that you've been involved in both the B2B and the B2C space and with mobile apps and e-commerce. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey and specifically how you landed back, I guess, to Microsoft.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I've been looking forward to this. Yeah, I'll give you the brief potted history. I mean, basically, I started my career at Microsoft when I was 21 years old, straight out of university. And I was a product manager on the Windows mobile team. And this is in a pre-iPhone world. You know, we had like 20% market share of a very, very small smartphone market. And my first, job was really around what we call developer evangelism. So getting developers to make apps for mobile devices, which, this is, again, before iPhone, before anyone heard of an app store. And so, getting anyone to really understand that these, smartphones would actually be functional computers in some way, and you'd be able to expand their capabilities, and then getting developers excited about the opportunity to build for them and things like that. So it was an interesting journey. At the time, we were very focused at Microsoft on winning in business. So like we thought the phone was like a business device. You're going to get your work laptop, and then you're also going to get your phone, which of course, history turned out a little bit different, and they were primarily a personal device. And so, was with Microsoft through a lot of the, changes as we tried to build a Windows phone to compete more specifically with Android and with iOS. And then really my last gig at Microsoft, before I left, we had just purchased Skype. And so I moved over to London, and I spent a bunch of time with sort of the original Skype team. At the time, I think they thought of me as a Trojan horse, probably the only guy using Windows in the entire building. And then we basically, over the next couple of years, started to integrate the technology more into our business software. That's when Lync became Skype for Business, and then, of course, later became Microsoft Teams. At that point, I left, and I spent a bunch of years doing startups, primarily in like VP product, chief product officer roles. So I loved being sort of on the side where you're like building it and experimenting a lot. My most recent role was at a company called Dashlane, which is a password manager app, both for B2B and B2C. And so now that I'm back at Microsoft, I'm excited to be working on Teams. I really do think like the future of work is being written right now. And there's a tremendous opportunity, I think, to get it either wrong or get it right. And so things are very fluid, and I'm excited to sort of be part of that.
Definitely not a boring period to be. So can you give us an overview of this first phase of Copilot integrations? I mean, maybe a sense of what Copilot is, and what potentially it can do, and these integrations into the Microsoft Office ecosystem. And if I understand correctly, it's going to be first on the mobile, not on the web. So give us a sense of that.
Sure. Yeah, so back on March 16th, we announced Copilot for our commercial customers. We had previously announced some generative AI stuff as part of Bing. And later, of course, we found out that that is specifically based on OpenAI's latest large language model. We're taking that same model and now applying it to commercial use cases. And so when you think about what that really means, one thing that became very clear is that AI is in lots of stuff right now. AI organizes your news feed on social media. AI is used to remove background noise on this call we're on right now. But a lot of that AI we would consider autopilot. Like you don't know, you don't see it, you don't really interact with it. But with the sort of the rise of generative AI and the fact that you're now going to be prompting the AI to provide you things, we felt like there was a different paradigm that would be needed there. And so that's specifically why we said it's not autopilot, it's Copilot. And so it's something where it's going to be along for the ride with you. And it's going to get stuff wrong sometimes, but it's going to, we believe, be very, very helpful nonetheless. And so initially, what we've built is on top of a large language model, again, with our partnership with OpenAI, trained on the entirety of the graph, which is available inside of each organization. So think about if you're a company and you're using Microsoft 365, we have this notion of the Microsoft graph, which is storing context, if you will, around all the interactions, the relationships between people and all of the files, the data they're using, things like that. So it knows who my manager is, it knows who my team is, it knows who I typically have meetings with, it knows what those meetings are about, because of course all that stuff sits in Outlook. So you have a tremendous amount of context, which when you think about it becomes very useful, because the large language model, as we've seen, when people are writing really good prompts, you get really good responses. And so if you see people building, these new AI generated images, the prompts are getting quite specific to generate really great results. And the same thing with ChatGPT, the kid that's writing his book report, if he asks the right questions, he gets a really, really good output. And so think about the Microsoft graph, all this information that sits at the organizational level as an excellent set of context on which to build this model. And I should just say, by the way, that model never goes back to us. It doesn't train any of what we're providing to other customers. It sits within the organization's boundaries, the compliance, the security, the privacy, and all that. But it becomes very, very specialized in that way to the organization and to the user that's using it. And then, of course, all that stuff surfaces inside of the Microsoft 365 app. So Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams. You mentioned some of it might be mobile first or whatever. I think that's just more of a period of time thing. For Teams, our initial version of Copilot's available just on the desktop. We prioritize that because that's where most people use Teams every day. On Outlook, I think they prioritize mobile initially because, frankly, a lot of the use cases are summarizing lots of text and writing long responses. That's super useful on mobile. And because, you don't want to sit there typing all day. So I think they're prioritizing, what platforms first, just based on that. But the idea is that obviously this will be pervasive across the platform.
So when I think of this co-piloting, because it's important, especially in financial services, what happens with the data and the training, is it a fusion of the large language model that's trained on the general information of the web and the internal data, as you said, that's there because of the Microsoft ecosystem?
Well, yeah, so it would, exactly right. But I would just say that, of course, it's going to be able to use the data that it's been trained on, which is from the broader internet. And we know that OpenAI has trained this large language model on a lot of information, including big chunks of the internet, right? However, the data that is being supplemented from your own organization, that stays within your organizational boundary. So if I ask Copilot to build a SWOT analysis, and no one has ever built a SWOT analysis ever in my company before, it will still know how to do that, because there is, of course, a model of how to build a SWOT analysis on the internet, and it can access that. But if I ask my Copilot about something that's very specific to one of our commercial customers, it's not going to answer that question, because of course that is within the boundary or the compliance boundary of that customer.
So, I'm very interested in imagining the integrations with Excel, because Excel is like such a core software or database or low-code programming software in financial services, that it's really very, very important. So can you give us a sense of how that could be used? Is it, again, integration with prompts in Excel? Is it programming? How exactly can we imagine that?
Yeah, I think all of the above. So, the first thing, I think you're exactly right. Something like 90% of Excel's functionality never gets used or discovered, right? And like, no matter what we do in the user experience, it's just a very powerful program. And so a lot of people just don't ever uncover the true potential. What I think is so interesting about Copilot, amongst many of the use cases, is this notion of commanding. And so, if I have a spreadsheet and I have a bunch of data that is in a series of columns, and suppose for a minute it's a list of like employees, and the first name and the last name are both in the same column. There is a formula to separate first name from last name into two different columns. I don't know what that formula is, but now I can just ask Copilot, hey, column A, split first and last name. Boom, done. And it gives you the formula that it used to do that. So you can kind of see exactly what it does. So you can imagine, first of all, it unlocks a lot of functionality that previously people just did not have the knowledge on. So I think it would definitely make all the novices, at least intermediate Excel users. But I think the more important things are really around summarization and using it to aid in decision making. So if you had a table of data around, products and, their prices and sales and things like that, you'd be able to ask Copilot to say, summarize this data and give me 3 key trends. And it would produce bullet points around those 3 key trends. So you can imagine just how useful it would automatically be just to be able to provide a TLDR in an email around this stuff. You can also then ask it to have breakdowns, so break down the sales growth of this specific product line, and it will build a new sheet that gives you the sales growth just for that. You can ask follow-up questions like, help me understand why there's a decline in this quarter, and it would build a trend map that shows specifically that. You could say add color coding to the tables, and it would add color coding. So you can imagine using it not just for commanding and like a shortcut for actually using the product itself, but actually to draw more conclusions and output. And I think that's where it gets really exciting. And you can imagine every single product, not just Excel, but Outlook, Word, Teams, of course, we're all thinking through what are the use cases where this becomes really useful for what that product was designed for. So a lot of the team stuff is like, how do we do it to enable collaboration? How do we make sure in a meeting everybody gets to consensus around what was discussed and what are the next steps? Different series of questions from Excel, but using the same powerful engine underneath.
As I listen to you describing this augmented world, and especially, if it's voice activated too, the commands, right? Which, I mean, that's an easy part to do. I'm thinking, can we imagine that the Microsoft family could be the first super app, AI-powered super app of the West for businesses, in the sense that, in Fintech, we think of China having developed, these super apps, the WeChat, Tencent, and so on, where people, do everything there, from their shopping, their transportation, their mobility, their businesses, and so on. And in the West, we don't have that, because for many reasons, mainly because we weren't starting with a blank sheet, right? And creating these super apps. But do you imagine that this Microsoft family can become a super app, in the sense that it's a closed ecosystem within which you could kind of do everything?
Well, I mean, I certainly think first and foremost that Microsoft always thinks about extensibility in their products, right? So we want to have cross compatibility and things like that. So when you say closed ecosystem, I do think that that's not where we traditionally want to live. However, I do think there is a really interesting notion of Copilot sitting as a abstraction on top of all of your data and being able to make sense of data and context, so you don't have to think in terms of applications anymore. So today, I want to work on a document, I'm going to open Word. I want to build a presentation, I want to open PowerPoint. I want, do something with Teams. So what we're seeing, and one of the initial things that we built as part of this launch was what we're calling business chat. And so the idea here is that you have a Copilot-like interface that you could get to from the web, but it's going to sit inside a team. So we believe most people are going to use it inside of Teams. Think of it as just like a contact, like any other, it's like you're talking to any other person, but instead it's business chat. And you're going to be able to ask it questions that go well outside of whatever Teams has traditionally been used for. You're going to be able to tell it, hey, make a PowerPoint deck based on this Word doc, and you'll be able to tag in, of course, it's on your OneDrive or on your SharePoint, the Word doc, and it will create a PowerPoint deck that's already going to be sitting and waiting for you on SharePoint. You open it up, and then you can start to manipulate it further. So you can imagine, again, like creating sort of transformations from, one set of data to another. You can also imagine it doing abstraction across things like people or topics. So I could say, give me a summary of all of my conversations this week with Nicole. And it will do that across my email and across my chat. It'll over time do it even like the comments inside of documents and things like that. Or I could ask it around, give me, a summary around everything that's happening with this specific project. What are the unresolved issues? What are the risks and mitigations? And when I ask a question like, what are the risks and mitigations? It's pulling from a variety of different sources. So it's probably found some PowerPoint slide called risks and mitigations inside of one of the related decks. And it's pulling that all into one summarized view with citations so that I can see exactly where it got this stuff from. So when you say super app, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to use this obviously to make payments and to get cars and, all the things that super apps traditionally have done in the consumer space. But I do think there is now a layer of interaction that sits above the app level, and that I think will be really, really useful, because you're able to then use this technology across topics and ideas, not just around apps and files. And I think that's a fundamental shift from where we've been in the past.
It is a fundamental shift. And I mean, you said that Microsoft has always had this vision. And I think that Microsoft tried to sort of bake in AI to connect different tools of AI in the past, but didn't succeed. Are you familiar with that? Or what has happened here? By the way, Copilot, I think, is just a brilliant term, because it really captures this, what you said, the interactivity, the insight, the collaborative aspect. It's just, to me, an ideal world. So I guess the question is, has Microsoft really tried before through AI to bring these integrations, and how is it different now?
Well, I mean, I think Microsoft, of course, has been very committed to any new frontier of computing, and we're always going to spend time on it. We're spending time, obviously, for years now on AI. But like I said, it was a lot in the ways that were a little bit more invisible to you. Like, we use extensive AI in Teams to just help with the performance of video calls and things like that, right? So like, there's always been that layer, and there's a tremendous amount of research and development that happens inside Microsoft that is on the cutting edge of those things. We've also done things like, actually, like inside of PowerPoint, for instance, there's been things like PowerPoint Designer, which like looks at the content of the slide and says, hey, you should relay this out, and here's some suggested ideas. Again, all that stuff is using some level of machine learning and intelligence as well. I think the difference here is the level of understanding. Like and if you look at anything that, has to do with generative AI and large language models, what really is happening is it's building a model of the world. And so in this case, it's building a model of all of your commercial data and all of the interactions that you have. And it has a fundamental understanding that I think we have not seen in the past. So, one example, like I was in an all hands meeting, and we were doing, like promotions and things, and just making little announcements and stuff like that. It was a large meeting, and I had Copilot turned on Teams. And so, throughout the thing, you can have a little conversation. You can, of course, you can say things like, what did Nicole just say? Or what did Jared just say? And it'll read it back. Because again, the other key change here is I think we just have a lot more of that context now. There's a meeting transcript that's always running. And the speech recognition is actually really good now. And so you have a really good data set to sit on top of to be able to do these fundamentally different experiences. And so anyways, throughout the meeting, there's this guy, Giovanni is his name, but he goes by Gio. And he was giving, sort of a praise to people around, the new promotions and things like that. And he made, a joke at the beginning about how he felt like he was on the Oscars, because he's giving out the awards. And so anyways, later in the meeting, I was doing a little demo of Copilot on what had already happened in the meeting. And I did not say, did Giovanni, I said, did Gio, I used his nickname. I said, did Gio make a joke today? And it said, yes, he did. He made a joke about, the Oscar, whatever. So by the way, he never said I'm making a joke. Like, it knew that it was a joke. So it had a fundamental understanding. And then I asked, did the joke land? Which is such a, first of all, I never, I imagine in an old world of AI, I'd have to be so specific with that prompt, right? But did it land? And it said, well, when he finished the joke, there was no audible laughter. However, he continued presenting without awkwardness, so it probably was okay. And I was wow. Wow. It's just, yeah. So when you say, is it different? Yeah, it's different. I think, it's hard to bottle exactly all the ways that it's different, but I think in many ways, what I've noticed is it just seems to really be good at understanding what you're trying to do. And if you think about it, humans are really good at that. When I say, the ball is rolling, we know that we're not talking about,
an actual ball rolling.
Yeah, a gallop, right? We know the ball is the round thing, but computers have not always known that. And so it's just really interesting when you see now that it has this fundamental understanding that it didn't have before, because of all the context and because of the large data and how good the prediction has been made.
I mean, obviously there are instances of hallucinations in these models and factual, fallacies and so on. But that's a question of improvement, or I think that we're going to end up maybe restricting the context, do we want a more creative mode or a more factual mode in the training of the model? And there are going to be improvements. I don't know what your opinion is on that. I don't think that that's sort of a deal breaker in terms of the upside of these models. Do you agree?
Well, I think the hallucination thing is very real. And I think when we did the announcement, we've talked about how Copilot is usefully wrong sometimes. And so what do we mean by that? When we're providing a summary or we're providing output, first of all, it always just comes to you, right? So we are not sharing that broadly. And so when I generate meeting notes inside of Teams, they come to me. The panel that I get where Copilot responds to me is just for me. I have the option to copy it, but I have to copy it and then paste it into the meeting chat, and then it's editable to me. And we make it very clear, check this over before you send this, right? The same thing happens inside of Outlook. I've been using the Copilot inside of Outlook to automatically generate responses. And it's quite intuitive. If in the email, it'll be like, Derek, do you want to do X or Y? At the bottom, it has suggested prompt, do X, do Y. And then it'll build an expanded version of that email. And then there's a version that's do X, but ask follow-up questions around timeline. So it's very good. But as soon as I use one of those auto-generated emails, before I can click send, I have to acknowledge that I've read it. And so we're trying to put little interrupts in place for the user, because you're right, the models are going to get better. I think the hallucinations over time are going to go down. But for right now, I think what we're wanting to do really is just give people the value and learn as much as we can, but with the acknowledgement that it's not autopilot, it's Copilot. You have to be along for this ride, and you have a part to play in this.
100%. That the interactivity is a major opportunity. I think I feel that we're just at another level of symbiosis between humans and software, because here we are baking these powerful tools within the tools and the processes that we are already using, with the purpose to augment everything, to augment ourselves, to augment whatever projects and goals we have. And I think that's a wonderful period of experimentation and testing and creativity, right?
Well, you know, it's funny because the thought that comes to mind is like I was reading this data around the energy output versus distance traveled of all living things. And it turns out like condors, I think, are like #1 in terms of like minimal energy output. They travel great distances. Humans are very low on the list, right? Until you put a human on a bicycle, and then we're #1. And so I think about it a lot like this, where it's like, how can this be an ability amplifier for us? How can this be the pedals? We're still there, we're still doing it, but we're doing so much more than we could have done before.
Amazing. And with that note, I'd like to close the discussion and thank you very much for your insights on Copilot and these augmentation tools. Thank you, Derek.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.